While I was away on a business trip, my husband called to say, "I'm leaving you for your best friend and we're moving to another city." I calmly replied, "Good luck with that." When I returned, I had already sold the house and moved our kids into a new home. The phone call came at a moment when I thought everything in my life was perfectly in place. My business trip had been going smoothly, and I was sitting in a cozy hotel room with a cup of coffee, catching up on work. It was one of those rare moments when everything seemed to align. My career was flourishing, my children were healthy and happy, and my marriage seemed solid. I was proud of what I had built and I felt at peace with my choices. Then the phone rang, shattering that tranquility. The caller ID flashed my husband's name. I answered it, expecting a simple check-in like any other day. What I wasn't prepared for was the words that followed. "Hey," he started, his voice oddly calm. "I need to talk to you about something. Before we continue, I want to take a moment to thank each of you for being part of this journey toward empowerment and new beginnings. If you're finding strength in these stories of transformation, consider subscribing. It's completely free and helps us grow this supportive community. Let's move forward together." I raised an eyebrow, setting my coffee cup down, a sudden unease creeping up my spine. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. He hesitated for a moment, then, as if rehearsed, the words spilled out. "I'm leaving you. I'm moving in with Laura, your best friend. We're relocating to another city to start over." His words cut through the air like a sharp blade, each syllable sending a shockwave through my chest. I could feel my heart sink, but strangely I wasn't angry. Not yet. My mind raced to make sense of what he had just said. Leaving me for my best friend? It didn't make sense. This wasn't the man I had married. We'd had our ups and downs, sure, but we had built a life together. The kids, the house, the memories, all of it was supposed to mean something. But he continued speaking, seemingly oblivious to the growing storm in my mind. "I think it's for the best. We need a fresh start. I've been thinking about it for a while now." His words, once affectionate, now felt hollow. He spoke with a calm detachment that only made my shock deepen. It was as if I was listening to a stranger. The man I thought I knew seemed distant, cold, and calculated. I didn't know how to respond. 1,000 emotions welled up inside me: anger, confusion, betrayal, but most of all, disbelief. How could this happen? Why no? I drew in a deep breath, holding my emotions in check. There was no room for hysteria or pleading. If he had already made up his mind, nothing I said would change it. Instead of reacting the way he likely expected, with tears and desperation, I responded with surprising calmness. "Good luck with that," I said, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. I could hear him hesitate on the other end, as if expecting more of a reaction. He probably wanted me to break down, beg him to stay, but I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. Instead, I hung up the phone. The silence that followed felt suffocating. I stared at the screen for a moment, as if waiting for some sort of answer to appear. The room felt suddenly smaller, the weight of his words heavy on my shoulders. But I refused to let myself crumble under it. The phone call had ended, but my thoughts kept spinning, replaying his words over and over. I had been betrayed. And in the quiet aftermath, I realized something that I had never considered before. I had spent so much of my life supporting him, believing in us, that I had neglected the one person who mattered most: me. But not anymore. The idea of revenge didn't come immediately. No, I wasn't consumed by rage, not yet. But there was something cold and calculating bubbling beneath the surface. I wouldn't let him get away with this. Not only was he leaving me, but he was also taking my best friend with him. They both thought I would fall apart, that I would be nothing without them. But they had underestimated me. I walked to the window, looking out at the busy city streets below. The world was moving on as usual, oblivious to the upheaval in my life. I wondered if my husband and best friend were out there somewhere, already planning their new life together. The thought stung, but I didn't let it break me. I wasn't the type to stay broken. I would show them that. I wasn't just going to pick up the pieces and try to make sense of this situation. I wasn't going to plead for them to stay, or beg for forgiveness for something I hadn't even done. No, I was going to take control of my life in a way that they would never expect. The betrayal had triggered something inside me. Something fierce, something determined. I didn't know exactly what I would do yet, but I knew that I wasn't going to be a passive participant in this story. I wouldn't let them see the vulnerability they had expected. Instead, I would outsmart them. As I sat there in my hotel room alone with my thoughts, I started to form a plan. Revenge wasn't about destruction or confrontation. It was about taking back my power. It was about showing them that they had made a mistake, that I could be stronger without them. The more I thought about it, the clearer my path became. I would make sure they would regret their choices. I wouldn't need to yell, scream, or cry. No, I would act. And when the time was right, they would see just how wrong they were about me. That night, I slept fitfully, my mind racing with ideas and possibilities. What I had thought was a simple business trip had now become the catalyst for a transformation in my life. I would never let myself be a victim again. The next morning, I began putting my plan into motion. I started by securing a new place for my children and me, away from the life that my husband had now chosen for himself. I wouldn't stay in the house that had once been our home. I wouldn't stay anywhere that had been tainted by their betrayal. But I didn't rush into anything. No, my plan would unfold slowly, methodically, in a way that would leave them speechless. The phone call had been the beginning of a new chapter in my life. A chapter where I would take back everything they had tried to strip away from me. And as I stepped into the next phase of my life, I knew one thing for certain. I would never be the same again. I had always believed that life had a way of rewarding hard work and dedication. And for a while, everything in my life seemed to confirm that belief. I had built a career that I was proud of, one that afforded me the kind of stability and security I had always longed for. My marriage had been the anchor through it all, steady and reliable, or so I thought. We had raised 2 wonderful children together, and our home was a place of comfort, a refuge where we celebrated milestones, weathered storms, and dreamed of the future. It was supposed to be forever. As I stood on the balcony of my hotel room, watching the city below bustle with life, I allowed myself a moment to appreciate the calm. I was in the middle of a business trip, something I rarely took, and I felt a sense of accomplishment. The hotel room was cozy and quiet, a perfect place to catch my breath between meetings. I had worked hard to get to this point in my career, and it felt good to know that all those late nights, early mornings, and sacrifices had paid off. I was proud of the woman I had become, both professionally and personally. The phone call had come in the midst of this rare moment of peace. The sound of my husband's name flashing across the screen seemed almost innocuous, nothing more than another check-in, like we always did when I was away. My thoughts were preoccupied with the presentation I was about to give, and I answered the call, expecting a quick hello and update on the kids. I was already planning in my mind how I would juggle work with catching up on family life later in the evening. But when his voice greeted me on the other end of the line, it sounded different. There was a coolness to it, a distance that I hadn't noticed before. It was as though he was holding something back, like he was bracing for impact. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "Hey," he said, his tone casual but with an undercurrent of something I couldn't quite place. "I need to talk to you about something." I set my coffee down slowly, suddenly aware of the tension in the air. I had no idea what was coming, but I could sense that this conversation was not going to be a simple check-in. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even, despite the sudden unease creeping over me. And then just like that, the bombshell was dropped. "I'm leaving you," he said, his words cold and flat. "I'm moving in with Laura, your best friend. We're relocating to another city to start over." The world around me seemed to freeze. For a moment, I couldn't process what he had just said. My mind raced, scrambling to make sense of his words, but they didn't add up. He was leaving me for Laura, my best friend, the person I had trusted most in the world. I felt a dizzying rush of emotions, shock, confusion, hurt, but all of them collided into one overwhelming sensation: betrayal. The life I had built, the family we had raised together, the future I had imagined for us, all of it was unraveling in an instant. I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. I couldn't seem to find the right response. What was I supposed to say to something like that? My mind screamed with 1,000 questions, but none of them seemed to matter. All I could hear was his voice, matter-of-fact and indifferent, as if what he was saying was perfectly normal. "Don't take this the wrong way," he continued, as though trying to justify the absurdity of it all. "I think it's for the best. We need a fresh start. I've been thinking about it for a while now. A fresh start. As if I had nothing to do with the life we had built together. As if the years of memories, struggles, and triumphs didn't mean anything to him. He had already made up his mind, and there was nothing I could say to change it. The words I wanted to scream, to plead, to demand an explanation, were lost in the shock that had overtaken me. I felt the knot in my chest tighten, but instead of letting it consume me, something inside me clicked. The anger that had been building from his betrayal now sparked into a quiet rage. But there was no room for that rage to spill over, not yet. I couldn't afford to let him see how much his words had affected me. He had already decided his path, and I couldn't waste my energy fighting a battle that he had already won. I took a deep breath and forced the words out, the calmness in my voice almost unnatural. "Good luck with that," I said, my words deliberate, controlled, but with an edge of finality. I didn't care about his reasons anymore. The truth was, I was done. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and I could feel him waiting for me to react. For me to beg him to stay. To tell him how much I loved him, how much I needed him. But I didn't. I didn't give him the satisfaction. Instead, I ended the call, the silence on the other side of the line almost suffocating. I sat there for a long moment, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on me. The peaceful hotel room now felt suffocating. My mind raced as the gravity of the situation began to sink in. But instead of breaking down, I felt something else. Something stronger, something I hadn't expected. I felt clarity. The call had shattered my world, but it also gave me something else. A clear sense of who I was and what I was capable of. I wasn't going to fall apart. I wasn't going to beg him to stay, or waste my time trying to understand his reasons. No, I was going to take control of my life, and I was going to do it in a way that they would never expect. I didn't know exactly what that meant yet, but I knew this much. I would show them that I was stronger than they ever imagined. The life we had built together, the house, the memories, all of it could be replaced. But my sense of self, my dignity, and my power, those were mine to keep. And they had just underestimated me. I looked out the window, watching the city bustle below, oblivious to the storm that had just been unleashed in my life. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't the helpless woman I had been just moments ago. I was someone else now. Someone who would fight back, not with anger but with quiet strength and purpose. This was just the beginning. The storm had come, and I was ready to face it head-on. The phone call had ended, but the chaos inside me was only beginning. I sat still for what felt like hours, staring at the now silent phone in my hand, trying to understand what had just happened. The words he had spoken were still echoing in my mind, replaying over and over like a broken record. "I'm leaving you for your best friend." Each repetition seemed to hurt more than the last. I was no stranger to challenges. Life had thrown its fair share of curveballs at me, but this felt different. This wasn't just a challenge. It was a betrayal, and betrayal is the kind of wound that cuts deeper than anything else. It wasn't just my husband who had turned his back on me. It was my best friend, the one person who I thought would always have my back. The realization that they had been hiding their feelings, making plans behind my back. It stung like nothing I had ever felt before. I tried to push the emotions away, to distance myself from the pain, but it was impossible. They were too raw, too real. A part of me wanted to scream, to let all the hurt and frustration out, but I knew that wouldn't change anything. What good would it do to scream into the void, to beg him to stay? He had already made his decision, and nothing I said could undo the damage. The more I thought about it, the more I felt the weight of it all. The life I had carefully built with him, the home we had created, the memories of raising our children together. All of it had been shattered in an instant. I could no longer see our life the way I had before. It was as if the lens through which I had viewed everything had been cracked, and I was struggling to make sense of what was left. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of emotions. Anger, sadness, confusion. Each wave of feeling came crashing over me, and I had no choice but to ride them out, hoping that eventually they would subside. But they didn't. The anger remained, simmering beneath the surface, a constant presence that I couldn't escape. And the sadness, it was a weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. But something else was happening, something I hadn't expected. As the anger and sadness swirled within me, something else emerged. A new feeling. A sense of clarity. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this betrayal didn't have to define me. I wasn't going to let it. I was done being a victim. It wasn't just the hurt that fueled me. It was the realization that I had spent so much of my life giving to others, supporting my family, caring for my husband and children, that I had forgotten to nurture myself. I had allowed myself to become so wrapped up in the roles I played as a wife and mother that I had lost sight of who I was. But no more. This was my turning point. I was angry, yes. I had every right to be. But anger, if harnessed, could be a powerful force. It could propel me forward, push me to take control of my life, to reclaim what was mine. I had spent so much time worrying about everyone else, putting their needs above mine, that I had neglected my own desires, my own dreams. But now everything was different. In that moment, I knew I couldn't allow this betrayal to break me. I had to use it. I had to channel this pain into something powerful, something that would reshape my future. My mind began to work slowly but surely. I thought about what I could do, what actions I could take that would allow me to not only survive this but come out stronger. But there was still a part of me that couldn't fully let go of the sadness. I kept thinking about the children, about how this would affect them. They were so young, so innocent. They didn't deserve to have their world turned upside down. The thought of them growing up with a broken family, of them losing their sense of security, it was heart-wrenching. My heart ached for them, but even then I knew I had to be strong for them. They needed me to be strong. I picked up my phone again, scrolling through the contacts list as I tried to make sense of everything. The anger I felt toward my husband and best friend was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but there was something else, too. A quiet resolve. I wasn't going to let them take anything else from me. They had made their choice, but I would make mine. It wasn't just about revenge, though. It was about reclaiming my life, my sense of self. It was about showing them that I was more than the person they thought I was. I wasn't just a wife, a mother, a victim. I was a woman who could stand on her own 2 feet no matter what. I stared at the phone for a moment, weighing my options. I could call him, demand answers, beg him to come back. I could cry, plead for him to change his mind. But I knew that wouldn't do any good. He had made up his mind, and nothing I said would change that. The best thing I could do now was to show him and myself that I didn't need him. I never had. I took a deep breath, letting the air fill my lungs, and slowly exhaled. The anger was still there, but it was no longer overwhelming. Instead, it had transformed into something else. It had become a quiet determination, a strength that was building inside me. I was no longer the woman who would sit idly by and accept betrayal. I was the woman who would rise from this stronger than ever. And I would do it quietly. There would be no shouting, no dramatic confrontations. I didn't need that. I didn't need him to see me broken, to watch me beg for his love. No, I would take control of my life in a way that he would never expect. I would prove to myself and to them that I was more than this. The sadness had not gone away. But the more I embraced this new clarity, the less power it had over me. The more I focused on what I could control, the less I cared about what I couldn't. I wasn't going to let this define me. I wasn't going to let this be the end of my story. This was just the beginning. The storm had come and it had shaken me to my core. But it had also awakened something inside me, a fierce, unshakable strength. I was ready to face whatever came next, and I was going to do it on my own terms. The betrayal had hurt. It had shattered me, at least for a moment. But it had also given me something priceless. The chance to rebuild. The chance to reclaim my life. And I would do it one step at a time. No matter what. The realization of betrayal still sat heavy in my chest. But something inside me had shifted. It was as though the fog that had clouded my thoughts was finally beginning to clear. The emotional storm, the anger, the sadness, was still there, but beneath it there was something deeper, something more powerful. A quiet resolve. A sense of clarity that gave me the strength to face what lay ahead. I wasn't going to drown in the pain of this betrayal. I wasn't going to let them see me break. Instead, I was going to use this moment, this pain, to shape my next steps. The phone call, the one that had left me reeling, was the catalyst for a transformation I hadn't expected. The emotions I had felt in the aftermath, the hurt, the disbelief, the burning desire for revenge, had settled into something different. A quiet determination to take control, to reclaim what I had lost. What they hadn't realized, what my husband and best friend hadn't expected, was that I wasn't going to fold. I was going to rise. And I was going to do it my way. For the first time since the call, I felt the urge to take action, to make a plan. I needed a way to regain control of the situation, to shift the power back into my hands. It wasn't about getting even or proving something to them. It was about proving it to myself. I had always prided myself on my independence, on my strength. I wasn't going to let this define me. No, this was just a chapter in my life, and I was the one writing the next one. I took a long, slow breath, trying to steady myself. There was no room for impulsive decisions, no space for emotional reactions that would only feed into their expectations. I couldn't afford to let them see me weak or desperate. They had already made up their minds, and it was clear that no amount of pleading or anger would change that. What I needed now was focus. What I needed was a plan. The first thing that came to mind was the house. The one we had bought together, the one that had been the cornerstone of our life. It wasn't just a building, it was where we had raised our children, where we had dreamed of growing old together. The thought of leaving it behind made my heart ache, but I knew it was the right thing to do. I couldn't stay there. It was too tied to the past, too connected to the memories that now felt like a lie. I needed a fresh start. A new place where I could begin to rebuild, where I could reclaim my independence and begin the process of healing. The children needed stability too. They didn't deserve to be caught in the chaos of our broken marriage. They needed to feel secure, and I was determined to give that to them. I knew what I had to do. I would sell the house. I didn't need anyone's permission, and I didn't need anyone's approval. I would take the necessary steps to move forward, to create a life for myself and my children that was free of the emotional baggage that my husband and best friend had left behind. I picked up my phone again, this time with purpose. I wasn't calling to beg for an explanation or to ask for forgiveness. I was calling to make sure that everything was set in motion. The house had to be sold, and I needed to make sure that the paperwork was finalized, that there were no complications. I wouldn't give my husband or my best friend the chance to interfere. This was my decision, and I was going to see it through. The call was brief, but it was effective. The house was going on the market, and the process would begin immediately. There was no turning back now. As the transaction moved forward, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. It was as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I wasn't just moving away from a house. I was moving away from the life I had built with my husband and best friend. I was starting fresh. But the house wasn't the only thing I needed to change. I needed a new place to call home, one that would be mine and mine alone. I started looking at homes online, imagining a space that would be completely my own. A place where I could create new memories. A sanctuary away from the remnants of my old life. It wasn't just about finding a house. It was about finding a space where I could heal, where I could grow. Each time I looked at a potential home, I felt a sense of hope begin to stir inside me. It wasn't going to be easy. I knew there would be challenges ahead. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control. I was the one making the decisions now. I was the one deciding what came next. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this plan wasn't just about getting away from the past. It was about building something new. I wasn't just leaving my husband and best friend behind. I was leaving behind the person I had been before. I was letting go of the woman who had put everyone else's needs above her own. I was letting go of the woman who had allowed herself to be defined by her role as a wife and mother. I was going to become the woman I had always wanted to be. The woman who wasn't afraid to stand on her own. The woman who could rebuild her life from the ground up. And I was going to do it without looking back. I wouldn't let them see me broken. I would show them that I could thrive without them. The process wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, moments when I wondered if I had made the right decision. But then I would think about what lay ahead. I would think about the life I was building for my children, the future I was creating for myself. And with each passing day, I grew more certain that I was on the right path. By the time the house was sold, I had found a new place. A beautiful, cozy home in a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't extravagant, but it was perfect for what I needed. It was a fresh start, a blank canvas where I could paint the life I wanted for myself and my children. It wasn't just a house, it was a symbol of my resilience, of my determination to move forward no matter what. I packed up our things, carefully sorting through the remnants of my old life. Each box I packed felt like a step toward the future, away from the past. And when the time came to leave the old house, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. It was time. I wasn't running away. I was moving toward something better. Something stronger. Something that was mine. And as I looked around one last time before closing the door, I knew without a doubt that I was ready for whatever came next. The plan had worked. It was only the beginning, but I had taken control of my future. And that, I realized, was the most powerful thing I could do. The final step was nearly complete, and with each passing day, I felt myself drawing closer to a life I hadn't known I wanted, yet somehow knew I needed. The house was officially sold. The house we had built together, my husband and I, was no longer ours. I had walked away from it. And it was strange, but I didn't feel a shred of regret. I felt lighter. At first there had been doubt. I remember pacing around the house, memories flooding in at every turn. The living room where we'd hosted birthday parties, the kitchen where we'd prepared countless family meals, the backyard where we had laughed and played with the kids. It had all felt so sacred, so unbreakable. I had poured years of my life into that house, and now it was just an empty space. Memories that no longer felt like my own. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the house didn't define me. It was just four walls. My life had never been about the house. It had been about the people inside it. And now those people had chosen a different path. They had broken the promises we had made to each other. They had taken something from me, but they had also given me something in return. The chance to truly begin anew. It wasn't a moment of triumph that I felt as I signed the final paperwork. It was a quiet sense of peace, a subtle understanding that I had made the right choice. The house wasn't my home anymore. The home I was creating would be somewhere else. Somewhere that was mine, where I could rebuild my life without the weight of betrayal constantly looming over me. The next step in this process was even more thrilling. The search for a new place. For the first time, I allowed myself to dream a little. Not in the way I used to, when those dreams were tied to my family, to the life we had built. No, these dreams were mine. This space would be a reflection of who I was becoming, not just who I had been. The thought of finding a new home was exciting, and it filled me with an energy I hadn't felt in a long time. I scrolled through listings online, imagining a fresh start. The idea of a new home somewhere far away from the remnants of my past felt like the perfect next step. I wasn't looking for grandeur or luxury. I wanted comfort, peace, and a place to breathe. Each listing I looked at felt like an opportunity. An opportunity to create a space that was my own without anyone else's memories attached. It wasn't just about choosing the right walls and furniture. It was about choosing the future I wanted for myself and my children. I didn't need my husband's approval anymore. I didn't need anyone's permission. There were moments when I felt the weight of what I had done, the enormity of selling the house, of making the decision to walk away from everything we had. But each time I reminded myself why I was doing it. I was doing it for me. And for my children, who deserved a stable, loving environment free of the toxic remnants of their father's betrayal. The days passed quickly as the sale of the house went through. Each day I felt a little more confident in the decisions I was making. The weight of the past was lifting slowly but surely. My life, which had once been dominated by a sense of dependence on my marriage, was now unfolding into something entirely new. Something that was all mine. Then one afternoon I found the perfect place. It wasn't a mansion or an extravagant property, but it was everything I needed. A charming house with a spacious living room, a cozy kitchen, and a small garden. It was simple, but it felt right. The moment I stepped inside, I knew. This was where I would begin the next chapter of my life. I moved quickly, making the necessary arrangements to buy the house. I didn't waste time second-guessing myself or wondering if I was making the right decision. I knew I was. This house, this new beginning, was mine to create. It felt liberating. But even as I made the decision to move forward, I knew the real test was still ahead. I had sold the house, secured a new home, and taken control of my future. But I still had to face what came next. The confrontation. The inevitable moment when my husband would realize that I had moved on. Not just from the house, but from him. That moment would come soon enough. But right now, as I signed the papers for the new house, I allowed myself to savor the victory. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about reclaiming my life, my sense of self. The house was sold. The past was behind me. And the future, though uncertain, was full of possibility. I stood outside the house, my new house, the one I had chosen for myself. The house I had worked so hard to get. It wasn't just a house. It was a symbol of my independence. It was proof that I was capable of starting over, of picking up the pieces of my life and rebuilding them brick by brick into something stronger, something better. As I looked up at the house, I couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. It wasn't just about the material aspects of what I had done. It was about the emotional transformation I had gone through. I had faced betrayal head-on and come out on the other side stronger than I had ever been. The house was sold. But that was just one chapter. The real story was only beginning. And this time I would be the one holding the pen. I smiled to myself, feeling a sense of calm settle over me. The storm had passed. And now it was time for me to live. Time to create a future that was all mine. Time to make this house truly feel like home. I walked inside, ready to embrace the new life that awaited me. It was the beginning of something beautiful. And this time I was in control. It had been a few weeks since I had made the final decision to sell the house. secure a new place and carve out a new life for myself. I spent the time preparing for the inevitable confrontation. The moment when my husband and best friend would realize that I had moved on, that I had taken control of my own destiny. Every night I lay in bed running through the possible scenarios in my mind. How would they react when they found out? What would they say when they realized that everything had already been settled, that the house was no longer mine to give? I wasn't sure. But I knew it was time for them to face the consequences of their actions. The moment came unexpectedly, but I welcomed it with calm certainty. I had just finished unpacking the last of the boxes in my new house, a place that already felt like home, when I received a call. It was my husband. His name flashed on my phone and I almost felt a sense of amusement. For weeks I had been waiting for this moment, yet when it arrived I felt surprisingly at ease. There was no panic, no dread, just the quiet understanding that the time had come to reveal the truth. I answered the phone without hesitation. "Hello," I said, my voice steady. "Hey, it's me." My husband's voice was tentative, unsure. "We need to talk." I felt a flash of something inside me. Perhaps it was the anger, perhaps it was the clarity I had been nurturing all this time, but I didn't let it break my composure. "Sure, what's on your mind?" I replied. There was a long pause. I could almost hear him collecting his thoughts on the other end, trying to figure out how to navigate the conversation. Finally, he spoke again, this time with a bit more conviction. Look, I've been thinking about everything and I just wanted to apologize," he said, his words almost slurring together in a rush. "I know I've hurt you and I'm sorry for how things went down. I made a huge mistake and I want to fix things." A wave of disbelief washed over me, but I swallowed it down, refusing to let it show. He was sorry. After all that had happened, after he had made the decision to leave me for my best friend, now he was sorry? The irony wasn't lost on me. But even more than that, there was something else gnawing at me. The realization that, in his eyes, everything was still about him. The conversation was still centered on his guilt, his feelings, as though I was simply there to listen and forgive. I exhaled slowly, steadying myself. This wasn't about me needing an apology. This was about me moving on, about him understanding that I was no longer in the place where his words held power over me. He had chosen his path, and now it was time to accept that the consequences of his actions were unfolding. "You don't need to apologize," I said, my voice calm but firm. "What's done is done." Another long pause on the other end of the line. "What do you mean?" "We're still married and You're not married to me anymore," I interjected, my words cutting through his protest. "You left, remember? You made your choice. I've made mine too." His silence was deafening. I could hear him breathing, the weight of my words settling in. For a moment I thought I heard a faint crack in his voice, but he quickly regained control. "I don't understand. Where are the kids?" he asked, his tone shifting from defensive to confused. "Are they with you? Why haven't you told me anything about them? Why didn't you even tell me you were moving?" "I didn't need to tell you," I replied, a note of finality in my voice. "The kids are fine. They're with me. I moved them to a new home, a place where we can start fresh, away from all the chaos you've caused. It's better this way. For them and for me." There was a brief silence, followed by a heavy sigh. "I never thought it would come to this," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "I didn't mean for it to be like this." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. The words he was speaking didn't matter anymore. The apology, the confusion, the regret. It was all too little, too late. I had already made the decision to leave it behind. I wasn't going to be drawn into his emotional turmoil again. Finally, I broke the silence. "Listen, I've got a new life now. I'm not interested in reopening old wounds or trying to fix something that's already broken. It's done." The finality in my voice seemed to snap him out of his daze. "So you're really gone? For good?" "Yes," I answered without hesitation. "For good." I could almost hear him struggling to find the words. But I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of breaking my resolve. I had long ago made peace with the fact that this was the end. My marriage was over, and it wasn't because of a lack of love. It was because of a lack of respect. And I wouldn't waste any more time trying to fix something that had been broken beyond repair. There was another long pause before he spoke again, his voice much softer now. "I hope you find what you're looking for," he said quietly. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I let his words hang in the air, almost like a final breath between us. When I finally spoke, I was calm, resolute. "I've already found it." And with that I ended the call. I sat there in the quiet of my new home, letting the weight of the conversation settle around me. It was over. For good. The phone call had been the final step in closing this chapter of my life. My husband had apologized, but it didn't matter. His apology wasn't what I needed. It wasn't what I was looking for. What I needed was to move on, to start fresh, and to reclaim my power. And I had done that. The truth had been revealed. I was no longer the woman he thought he could control. I wasn't his anymore. I was mine. And now, as I looked around my new home, I realized that I had already started the next chapter. One where I would shape my destiny, free from the chains of betrayal. One where I could create a future on my own terms. The past was behind me. The future was mine to build. And I was ready for it. It had been a few days since I had told my husband that I was done. A few days since the phone call that had sealed the final chapter of our marriage. My new life had begun to take shape, and although it wasn't perfect, it was mine. I felt in control, a sense of peace settling in as I started unpacking the last of the boxes in my new home. The children had adjusted to their new surroundings, and every day felt like a small victory as we settled into a rhythm, free from the emotional turbulence of the past. But deep down I knew the confrontation was coming. It had to. There was no way they could stay in their little bubble forever, pretending that nothing had changed. My husband had made his choice. And my best friend Laura had chosen him. But I had chosen me. I had no idea when exactly it would happen. Part of me had hoped they would take their time, that they would give me the space I needed to fully embrace my new life. But I wasn't naive. I knew they would come to confront me eventually. After all, my husband had always been the one to take the lead. But now things were different. I was no longer the person who needed to follow his decisions. I had taken charge of my own destiny. The day of the confrontation arrived quietly, like an ordinary morning. The kids were getting ready for school, and I was sipping my coffee as I looked over the plans for my next project. Life had a calm to it that I hadn't known in years. There was a knock at the door. I stood up quickly, my heart skipping a beat. I knew. I didn't have to ask who it was. I opened the door and there they stood, my husband and Laura. The sight of them together, standing on the other side of my threshold, sent a ripple of emotion through me. It wasn't the shock of betrayal anymore. That had faded. Now it was simply the realization that everything they had done to me had led to this moment. They had underestimated me. "Hi," my husband said, his voice tentative as though unsure of what to expect. Beside him, Laura stood awkwardly, her eyes darting between me and him. She looked different somehow, like she was carrying the weight of something she wasn't ready to face. I didn't speak immediately. I let the silence hang in the air. This was their moment of reckoning. They had come here expecting some kind of confrontation or emotional outburst. But I wasn't going to give them that. Not anymore. After a moment, my husband spoke again, more urgently this time. "Look, I know things have been rough and I just want to make things right. I know I messed up. I hurt you and I want to apologize for everything. I've been thinking a lot about all of this and I just want to fix it." I blinked slowly, almost amused by his words. His tone was desperate, as if he thought I still held on to the hope that he would come back, that I would welcome him with open arms. But I wasn't that woman anymore. That version of me was gone, lost in the wake of his betrayal. "I don't need your apology," I said quietly but firmly. "What you did doesn't change the reality of what we are now. You made your choice and I've made mine." His face faltered and Laura took a small step forward, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Please," she said, her voice soft but laden with guilt. "We never meant to hurt you. We didn't know how to handle it. Things got out of hand. I never wanted to betray you like this." I could hear the sorrow in her voice, but it wasn't enough to reach me anymore. I had moved past this. I wasn't here for apologies or regrets. They had chosen their path and now it was time for me to walk down mine. "You don't get to say that now," I said, my voice steady. "The time for apologies is long gone. You both made a choice and now you have to live with it. I'm not going to give you the satisfaction of feeling like you can fix this. I'm not your project to save." I saw a flicker of something in Laura's eyes. Perhaps it was guilt, perhaps it was confusion, but it quickly passed. She shifted uncomfortably, glancing at my husband for support. He stood there looking lost, as though he was waiting for me to break down, for me to beg him to stay, to ask for him back. But I wouldn't. I wasn't going to beg for anything. Not from him. Not from her. Why are you doing this? My husband asked, his voice almost pleading now. Why can't we just move on? Why can't we just go back to how things were? We can fix this. I shook my head slowly. You don't understand, I said, more to myself than to him. You can't just erase what you've done. You can't undo the damage. What you did to me, to us, it's not something that can be fixed with a few words. It's not something I want fixed. It's over. Laura stepped forward again as if trying to bridge the gap between us, but I wasn't interested in her words. I never meant for things to go this far. I thought we were friends. I thought I was helping, and now look what's happened. Please, can't you see? I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you, but I wasn't listening. I had listened long enough. The more I heard them speak, the more I realized that they were still trying to absolve themselves of the guilt. They wanted forgiveness without truly understanding the weight of their actions. And I couldn't give them that. Not anymore. You both don't get it, I said, taking a deep breath. I don't need to hear any more apologies. What I need is for you to understand that I've moved on. I'm not the same woman who used to wait for you. I'm not the same woman who put your needs above my own. That woman is gone. And I'm not going to allow you to make me feel like I owe you anything. I don't. The silence between us grew thick. My words had hit their mark, and I could see the realization in their eyes. They had expected a different reaction. A meltdown, a pleading for their love, a desperate attempt to win him back. But that wasn't who I was anymore. They were faced with a woman who had found her own strength, her own independence, and they had to accept that. After what felt like an eternity, my husband finally spoke again, but his words were different. I'm sorry, he said, his voice quieter, more resigned. I guess I thought you would never let go. I thought I could fix things, but I see now, you've already moved on. I nodded, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. It's time for both of us to move on. You and Laura have each other now. And I have my life. It's time to stop looking back. With that, they turned and walked away. As they left, I stood in the doorway watching them go. It was the last time I would see them together, and for the first time in a long while, I felt free. The confrontation had been inevitable, but I was no longer the person they thought they could control. I was stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. The past was over, and I was ready to embrace my future with no more looking back. The door had barely closed behind my husband and Laura when the weight of what had just transpired began to settle in. I stood there for a long moment, looking out at the quiet street in front of my house. The confrontation, the final words, the realization that everything was truly over. It all felt surreal. Yet as I stood there, I could feel the storm inside me calm piece by piece. I wasn't angry. I wasn't upset, even though the past had been full of betrayal, lies, and broken promises. Instead, there was something else rising within me. Something that was quietly powerful, something that I hadn't fully realized before. Clarity. I had faced them, spoken my truth, and now I was free. But it wasn't the end of the emotional reckoning. It was only just beginning. I walked inside, shutting the door behind me. The house was quiet, too quiet, but it was a silence that was comforting. The kids were out with their friends, spending their afternoon in the park, and I had a few precious moments to myself. I let my shoulders relax as I sat down, the weight of the world finally lifting off them. For the first time in ages, I felt a sense of peace. Not because I had won some battle or proven a point, but because I had taken control of my life. I had faced my fears, my pain, and my grief, and I had walked away from it. But as I sat there reflecting on everything that had happened, the emotions began to creep back. The anger. The hurt. The feeling of betrayal that had been buried under my sense of strength. They were all still there, simmering beneath the surface, waiting for a release. I reached for the photo album on the coffee table. An album that, until recently, had been full of happy memories of my husband, the kids, and our life together. I hadn't looked at it in weeks. The pictures had become a painful reminder of everything I had lost. But now I needed to face it. I needed to confront the past head-on and acknowledge that it was gone. My marriage, my life as I knew it, had vanished in an instant. And no matter how much I wanted to pretend that things could have been different, the truth was undeniable. As I flipped through the pages, I saw the smiles, the vacations, the family moments we had shared. I remembered the way we had talked about the future, the plans we made, the promises we had sworn to each other. But looking at these images, I felt nothing but emptiness. The person in those pictures. The woman who believed in forever, the woman who had trusted her husband and her best friend, was gone. Tears welled up in my eyes, but they were not tears of regret. They were not tears of longing for what could have been. They were tears of release. I allowed myself to grieve, to mourn the life I had lost. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I had to let it all out before I could truly move on. But in that moment, I understood something that had been eluding me for weeks. I wasn't mourning the loss of my husband. I was mourning the loss of who I had been. I had spent so much time being someone else's wife, someone else's partner, that I had forgotten who I was without him. But now the person I had been was shedding the old skin, leaving behind the doubts, the fears, the insecurities. The truth was, I had become someone stronger. I had become someone I was proud of. The tears subsided and I closed the album, placing it gently back on the coffee table. I didn't need it anymore. The memories would always be there, tucked away in the corners of my mind, but they no longer had a hold on me. I wasn't defined by them. I was defined by who I had become, by what I had survived, and by the life I was now building. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the sunset. The sky was painted in hues of pink and gold, the light soft and warm. For the first time in a long while, I felt like the future was wide open, full of possibilities. I didn't know exactly what it would hold, but I knew one thing for sure. It would be mine. And I would navigate it on my terms. The doorbell rang, pulling me out of my thoughts. I walked toward the door, not sure who it could be, but as I opened it, I was met with a surprising sight. It was Laura. She stood there, her posture stiff, her hands clasped in front of her as if she was bracing herself for something. For a moment, I thought about closing the door. Part of me wanted to keep the peace, to protect the new life I was creating, but something told me I needed to face this once and for all. I took a deep breath and stepped aside, allowing her to enter. She hesitated for a moment, then walked in, her gaze lowering as if unsure of how to proceed. "I came to apologize," she said quietly, her voice soft, hesitant. "I know I've hurt you and I've been thinking about everything. I've realized how selfish I've been." I didn't interrupt her. I didn't speak. I simply nodded and waited, giving her the space to express what she needed to. "I never meant for things to go this way," she continued, her eyes filled with regret. "I never meant to hurt you. But I did. And I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect anything from you, but I needed you to know that I'm truly sorry." I felt the weight of her words, but something in me had shifted. I had faced the hardest part already. I had let go of the anger and the resentment, but this moment, this apology wasn't about forgiveness. It was about closure. And I realized as she stood there in front of me, that I didn't need her apology. I had already forgiven her in my heart, not for her sake, but for mine. I couldn't carry that burden any longer. "I appreciate your apology," I said, my voice calm, measured. "But I've already forgiven you. I've forgiven myself too. And now it's time for both of us to move on. You and him and me and my kids. We all have our own paths now." She stood there in silence for a long moment, her shoulders slumped. I could see the weight of her guilt in her eyes, but it didn't matter. I was no longer the person she had betrayed. I was stronger, and I was ready to embrace my future without any lingering bitterness. "Goodbye, Laura," I said softly, stepping aside to let her leave. "Take care." She didn't say anything more. She simply turned and walked out of the door, leaving me standing there at peace. The emotional reckoning had come, and with it I had faced the truth. About my past, about my pain, and about my strength. I wasn't defined by my past mistakes or the people who had hurt me. I was defined by my ability to rise above it, to take control of my life and to move forward no matter what. And in that moment I knew, my future was mine to shape. The days that followed my confrontation with Laura and my husband were oddly peaceful. The calm that had settled over me after their departure remained, and it allowed me to finally breathe freely in my new life. There was no anger left in me. Just clarity and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that I had made the right decisions. The past felt like a distant memory now, a chapter that had closed as I continued to rebuild my life from the ground up. But even in this calm, something gnawed at me. A small part of me still wondered how my husband and Laura were coping with their choices. I had no intention of reaching out to either of them again, but the thought lingered. They were so wrapped up in their own guilt and confusion, their own sense of loss, that I knew they were struggling. But was that really my problem anymore? Should I care about the consequences of their actions, or was I now finally free to live for myself without looking back? It was around this time that the final twist came, the unexpected revelation that would shift everything once again. It came in the form of a letter A simple envelope that arrived at my door one afternoon, addressed in handwriting I recognized immediately. It was from my husband. At first I almost didn't open it. The last time I had spoken to him I had made my position clear. I had told him everything I needed to say and I was finished with the emotional exchanges. But something about the envelope nagged at me. It wasn't like him to write, not after everything that had transpired. He had always been a man of words, but rarely the kind that would come in a letter. So with a quiet sigh I opened it, not knowing what I was about to read, but bracing myself for whatever was inside. The words on the paper were simple, but they hit harder than I anticipated. Thought you would break. I thought I could leave and you would fall apart and I could rebuild something new with Laura. I was wrong. You didn't break. You built yourself back up, stronger, freer, more capable than I ever realized. And now I see the cost of my choices. I see the woman you've become and I know that I lost something truly irreplaceable. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I understand now. The woman I thought I could control is the woman I will never get back. And that's my regret. I lost you and I lost myself in the process. The letter wasn't filled with empty promises or plea for reconciliation. It was genuine, raw, and it struck a chord deep within me. He had finally acknowledged the truth I had known all along, but he had been too blinded by his own choices to see. I hadn't broken. I had rebuilt. And in doing so, I had become something stronger than either of them had ever given me credit for. As I finished reading the letter, I let it sit in my hands for a moment. The anger, the resentment, the betrayal, it all came rushing back, but this time it didn't hurt. It wasn't a wound to be reopened. Instead, it was a part of the process. It was a lesson learned. For the first time since the initial shock of his betrayal, I felt something that was not anger or sadness. I felt a relief. Relief that I had finally found the strength to move forward. Relief that I had not allowed myself to be consumed by the pain they had caused. But there was something else that lingered in my mind, something I couldn't shake. His words, I lost you and I lost myself in the process. They stayed with me, lingering long after the letter had been set aside. In that moment I realized the full weight of what had happened. It wasn't just a matter of my husband choosing Laura over me, or of me moving on and finding my own strength. It was about the cost of choices. It was about the unintended consequences of actions. The cost was not just his marriage. It was his own sense of self. And that was the real price he would have to pay. I sat for a long time reflecting on everything that had happened. I had known in the depths of my being that he didn't fully understand the impact of his actions until it was too late. He had always been a man who controlled, who thought he could direct the course of his life and mine with ease. But now the tables had turned. He had lost his family, his sense of stability, and most importantly, he had lost the woman he had once loved. In a way, I felt pity for him. He was the one left to deal with the consequences, to live with the knowledge that the life he had chosen was one he couldn't return to. He was the one who would face the reality of what had been lost. And yet, despite all of that, I felt no desire for revenge. There was no satisfaction in his regret. There was no joy in his realization that he had been wrong about me. In fact, I realized that his loss wasn't something I needed to dwell on. His regret was his burden, not mine. The past was gone and the future was mine to shape. I walked over to the window, looking out at the world outside, the sky stretching out before me in a vast expanse. There was no limit to what lay ahead. The world was wide open and I was free. I didn't need his apology or anyone's for that matter. I didn't need his regret. What I needed was to focus on the life I was building for myself and my children. A life filled with hope, strength, and new beginnings. The cost had been high, but it had not been in vain. I had learned the most valuable lesson of all, that I was capable of standing on my own. I was capable of moving forward no matter what the past had held. And as I stood there looking out at the horizon, I made a promise to myself. I would never look back. The past was behind me and the future was mine to embrace. The final twist in this story wasn't about revenge or redemption. It was about the realization that I was enough, on my own, and that the only price worth paying was the one that led me to my own strength. And with that, I took my first step forward into the new life that awaited me. I stood by the window, the cool breeze brushing my face as I gazed out over the landscape, my mind swirling with everything that had transpired over the past few months. It felt like a lifetime ago that my world had been turned upside down by betrayal, by the heartache of losing both my husband and my best friend. But now here I was standing tall in my new home, a place I had chosen, a place where I could finally breathe, where I could finally live for myself. The journey to this moment hadn't been easy. There had been tears, doubts, and painful realizations. But through it all, I had learned something profound about myself. I had learned that strength doesn't come from avoiding pain. It comes from facing it head-on, embracing it, and using it as the fuel to rise again. And rise I did. I was no longer the woman who had begged for her husband's love, who had put others' needs before her own. I had learned to put myself first, to reclaim my life and my identity. I glanced at the photo of my children on the mantel, their smiling faces a reminder of the reason I had fought so hard to make this change. They deserved a life filled with love, security, and stability. I would be the one to give that to them. Together we had left the past behind and stepped into a new future. One that was brighter, one that was ours. The kids had adapted quickly to the move. They loved their new home, the space to run, the new friends they had made. They didn't dwell on what had happened, and neither did I. For the first time in a long time, there was laughter in the house, a genuine sense of peace. They were happy, and that was all that mattered. I had given them that, by choosing to move forward, by choosing to let go of the toxic remnants of the past. But I couldn't deny the fact that I had been changed by everything that had happened. I was different now, stronger, more self-aware, and more resilient than I had ever been. There was a quiet confidence in me now, a sense of power that came from knowing my worth, from recognizing that I didn't need anyone's approval to feel complete. I had proven to myself that I could weather the storm, that I could emerge from the darkest of times with my head held high. As I walked through the house, taking in the simple beauty of the space, I thought about how far I had come. The house wasn't extravagant, but it was everything I needed. It was mine, built with my own strength, and it reflected who I had become. It wasn't just a place to live. It was a symbol of my resilience, my ability to rise from the ashes and create something new. The walls, the rooms, the kitchen where I would cook for my children, everything felt like a triumph. I stepped into the garden, the sunlight filtering through the trees, casting long shadows across the yard. This space was mine to cultivate, both literally and figuratively. I could plant what I wanted here. Flowers, vegetables, dreams. It was a blank slate, just like the life I had ahead of me. I could feel the pull of the past, the memories that had once defined me. But they no longer held any power over me. I had closed that chapter. The betrayal, the pain, the heartbreak, they were all part of the story, but they were no longer the defining parts. The woman I had been before was gone. The woman who had stayed in a marriage that wasn't fulfilling, who had placed everyone else's happiness above her own, was a memory. Now I was someone new. Someone stronger. Someone who could face the world on her own terms. A quiet determination settled over me. I wasn't going to waste time looking back, wishing for things that could never be. I wasn't going to dwell on the regret or the what's. The future was too bright for that. My future. My children's future. As I took a deep breath, inhaling the fresh air, I realized that I had nothing left to prove. I had already proven everything to myself. I had faced the darkest parts of my soul and come out stronger on the other side. I didn't need anyone's validation. I didn't need anyone's apology. I was enough. And that realization, that truth, settled into me like a weight that had been lifted. It was a beautiful thing to truly understand your own worth. I had spent so many years lost in the roles I played, wife, mother, friend, that I had forgotten who I was outside of them. But now I knew. I knew exactly who I was. I looked over at the garden once more, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. The seeds I had planted in my own life were beginning to grow. They weren't fully realized yet, but I could see the potential. I could see the roots taking hold, and I knew that in time, the fruits of my labor would bloom. The phone rang then, snapping me out of my reverie. It was an unknown number, but I answered anyway. "Hello," I said, curious but not expecting much. "Hi, is this?" The voice on the other end faltered, then seemed to gather strength. "Is this the woman who recently moved into the house on Oak Street?" I smiled. It was one of my new neighbors. "Yes, it is," I replied. "How can I help you?" "I just wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood," the voice said warmly. "We've seen the moving trucks and wanted to introduce ourselves. We're having a little neighborhood gathering this Saturday, and we thought you might want to join us." I felt a warmth spread through me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged somewhere. I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. "That sounds wonderful," I replied. "I'd love to join." Thank you for the invitation. As I hung up the phone, I realized that this was it. The beginning of a new chapter, not just for me but for my children too. We had made it through the storm and now we were starting fresh. Together. The house was no longer just a place to live. It was a home. A real home filled with the promise of new beginnings. The past no longer had a hold on me and the future was waiting, full of hope and possibility. And for the first time in years I was truly free.